Welcome back, GRD131, Graphic Design 1, to part 2 of our Graphic Design Solutions lecture on Chapter 2, talking about design elements, design principles, and a lot more. We'll pick it up with Unity. Here's a painting. Now, why did I put a painting in here? Well, I talked about art and design, and there's design that goes into art, and there's art that goes into design. Now, they work together. Now, this isn't a graphic design piece because the purpose is just for decoration. And actually, this is one I did because my wife wanted us to have a painting with everybody in it, because I did separate paintings with different kids in it, and we have a blended family. And this put all the kids together. Now, obviously, they're not in equal hierarchy. If you think about that, we could apply all the design elements to this painting. Think about hierarchy. Think about what has the most importance. Well, these two right here, they have the most importance. Why? Well, they're bigger. They're in the foreground. They sit in the space. They're actually kind of in the bottoms. It's because it's a landscape format, they sit kind of in the bottom, and that gives weight to the bottom. Kind of like if you think of, when you look out the window, you think of ground and trees. Everything's kind of anchored to the ground and the sky's more open. So they're kind of anchored to the ground more. They're in the foreground. Now, what else gives them more emphasis? Well, is there a contrast? Yes. She's very light. He's very dark. He has a dark shirt on, so there's a lot of contrast. Dark blue, a lot of blues here, a lot of lights. So there's contrast between the two of them that creates contrast. And there's also contrast because of the shape. They're the two biggest shapes on here, and then there's a lot of open space, and then there's some shapes in the background. But one of the things that I want to point out about this, I could go on about this painting because there's a lot of elements. There's line, there's flow, there's all kinds of things going on. But the reason I have this under the Unity section is because something I learned about painting, and I learned this because I take pictures from all different places and I sometimes put them together. This was not a scene I took a picture of. Matter of fact, even these two were not in the same position. They're in very different positions. So I pieced together a photograph, a bunch of photographs in Photoshop, and I painted that. And that's how I got everybody together from all different photographs. Now, what I had to do was unify that, make them all work together. And there's a lot of ways I did that, just by where they're positioned, the flow. There's a lot of directional elements, all those kind of things I could talk about. But as far as Unity, the biggest thing I learned about painting, it's using the same colors in all parts of the painting. That means there's dark blues up here. I'm using the same blue palette that I used up here down here. I'm using the same blues up here that are in her bathing suit. There's even the same aqua colors in her bathing suit and the same blues. So I'm sharing the same blue so that with Unities, it's all working together. There's aquas here, there's aquas here. There's blues up here, there's blues down here. There's blues down here, there's blues up here. There's aquas all over. There's sand tones. Now, I know this is the sand and that's the ocean, but notice I use the same kind of, earthy tones, kind of beigey kind of colors all over, even in the waves, even in the reflections, because the sky creates reflection. You're going to see the same colors from the sky on the ground because they reflect. So it's reflecting all kinds of things here. So it's very important, even in painting, even in fine art, to use the same colors so it unifies. This painting actually works. I look at it all the time because it's in our family room. And I didn't do it as more of an artistic piece, but as something that kind of incorporated all our kids. But I actually like it because it is very unified. And I learned that lesson to make sure I used all the same color palettes all the way around. Yet it still has other elements. There's contrast. It's very dark at the top, and then it gets lighter as it goes down. There's alignment. There's all kinds of directional things. There's horizontal lines here. There's a diagonal line here, which kind of creates some movement. It keeps your eye moving. This shape here, his arm pointing to her, creates some dynamic between the two, her arm going down. So there's a lot of kind of interactivity between these two. There's a line, she's looking out, and then there's actually a line in the water that's kind of following that out. And that's not all just accident because I painted it, so it doesn't mean all that stuff was there. So all these things are keeping your eye move around. He's looking over there to her. Now she's leading you out of the picture, but there's something to be said about that because she was kind of like always doing her own thing anyway. So that's kind of her personality of kind of just doing her own thing and kind of walking on her own. And he's kind of doing his own thing there, and she's looking out here. So it actually captures their different personalities too. But these two in the middle kind of pull everything together. Even the blue bucket, it creates a grounding there. It gives you some sense of scale because you understand how big they are. So there's a lot of unifying things here about this painting. That's why I brought it here, just because I look at it and I like it in terms of unity. Not that I think it's the greatest painting that I've ever done, but it's very unified, and I like that the colors make it all work together very nicely. Now here it's talking about unity repetition. I don't know if I like this thing as much, but it's very high contrast. That's repeating the step shapes right here in the shape. So as you look at this more and more, you could see a lot more repeating. This thing is almost like a step. She has very angular kind of features here. So there's a lot of things repeating in here. So people will do that, and it kind of creates more of a foreground, background. This brings your eye in, this brings your eye second, and then this is repeating. This is repeating the red color all throughout. That helps tie it together a little bit. The red color that's being repeated in all these little kind of stamp shapes kind of pulls it together, and it makes it kind of work. So it helps unify it. That's why we're talking about repetition under Unity, because it's helping bring it together. It's helping unify it. Now, another thing with Unity they'll bring up with this thing here is you need variety. And one way to describe that, and I should play music or something, but if you ever hear a song, there's there's the intro, then there's the verse, and then there's a chorus, and then there's a verse, and then there's a chorus, and then it doesn't just end. Then there's always a middle break in it. There's always some kind of break. It could be a guitar solo, it could be something different. It could be the way they're singing it a different way. There's always some kind of break to break it up, and that's what you need with Unity sometimes. You need a break. You need something to make it look a little different. That's why in this painting, if it was just 5 kids standing all the same size, it would be kind of boring. But the fact that these are bigger, they kind of break things up. The fact that there's a bucket there kind of breaks things up, because everything's very natural, sand and water. And then you have a bucket there, which like a real object there, which kind of breaks it up a little. So there's elements that break it up. If everybody was wearing the same thing, he's wearing a white shirt, which breaks it up. The fact that the wave is white here, and then it's kind of the underside of the wave here, it breaks it up. You need something to break things up, or else it gets boring. So that's the whole thing with variety. You need to break things up. If you have anything that's too symmetrical, if you're doing landscape design or anything, if anything is too symmetrical, you want something to break it up. So just to make it a little different, or else you kind of lull people in this kind of monotony, this kind of, it's repeating. That's how you put people to sleep, repeating something. That's why you have to, make something kind of jump out, and that'll make it a little bit different, and it'll make you take notice. So that's what's happening here. This really jumps out here. It's a visual surprise. And finally, it's talking about space, how everything works in space. And we talked about that earlier. And remember, white space is very important. You don't want to have they call it dead spaces. And what we'll call it sometimes, it'll be trapped areas. There'll be areas of white space that don't do anything. They get trapped. I think in one of the designs we did, I mentioned about creating a T shape. You don't want to have a T shape, because if you have something horizontal going across the page, it'll block your eye from going down. So you want to make sure you use the space well. And we'll talk about that when we critique designs and work on designs and look at designs. But space is very important. The space you're in is very important. And again, that's why I bring up the beer can again. I do love this can, but you're limited to this vertical space. So if you're limited to that, your eye can only go down. So you have to work with that space. You can't have a lot of juxtaposition. You can't have things moving around. And notice, even if you think of this as a sheet of paper, even though it's a can, this is the sweet spot. This is the upper third, and that's where your eye goes. They didn't put the big logo down here. They put it up here. And this is kind of in the sweet spot. So, and it's using that space. And this stuff is standing out because it's on a dark blue background. If they had just silver, this wouldn't stand out. But this is standing out really nice on that kind of background. And that's all because of the space you're working in. Space is the format that you're working on. So it's very important to be working the space. It's very important not to have things too big. They didn't make this logo too big. Think of alignment. Look at this. I can move down here and everything is lined up very nice. That's not an accident. This is all lined up. It's almost like on a page, it has a margin over there. Everything's lined up. They didn't just make this really big and this kind of in the middle or anything like that. Everything is lined up very nice. And the red goes around because the can goes around. You could turn it around. You're not just looking at a 2D can. When you have the can, it's 3D, so you could spin it around. But it's a very nice example of alignment working in that space, of creating white space around it, so it leads you down. This shape as a hexagon, it has a point on it, so it leads you down to here. This has a little bit of an arch to it, slight arch. And then down here at the bottom, it's kind of more subdued, smaller text. And we also have repetition. Same font. They're using that same kind of almost a handwritten kind of font that they're using. They're using it down here in smaller cases. Sometimes they're using it with all caps, sometimes they're not. Well, actually, I think it's all caps most of the time, other than a decorative capital letter. But they're using the same font, so that creates a unity as well. That we were talking about just the slide before, using the same font. There's no font that's really looking different, other than this is kind of on an angle, and it has red a little bit more, and they have a logo here. This is another example of space. This isn't mine. This is from the PowerPoint, but this is kind of using kind of blurred colored circles in the background to give the idea of like like light. These could be lights hanging in a background, and it really makes this come forward. You think of like some kind of dark, I don't know, nightclub scene or an art gallery or something where this really comes forward. So it creates space, it creates depth. It really makes this stuff, even though there's color, go in the background, and it really makes this thin white type really pop. And it's using space nicely because it's very big. There's a lot of space in between it. It's very clean. These are very clean lines. These are all circular kind of shapes here, but it's really a nice example of using space, and your eye really just drawn to it because this sits back and this comes forward for various reasons. Here it's contrast. This stark white really comes forward. These muted colors, if these colors weren't muted, if they weren't blurry, if they're really bright, they would be distracting. But the fact that they're more pastel and blurry looking in the background really make them sit in the background, just like if you saw a photograph, or your eyes would even perceive these as a little bit more blurry when you're looking at something in the foreground. When your eyes focus on something, everything in the background blurs a little bit. So that's what they're kind of doing here. So that's nice to create space. That's what they're doing. They're creating spatial depth, as they say here. And the last part of the slide that they're talking about are the laws of perceptual organization. And I already talked about some of these things, like in the painting, continuing line, closure, where your eyes will kind of close off things. If I go back to the painting, there's visual lines here. Now, I didn't draw a line there, but there's a line that's kind of connecting it. Here's a line that's going through it. The line of the water is actually kind of creating a crisscross kind of shape there. So there's lines here that are leading into the other person. There's horizontal lines at the top. He's creating a line that's leading down to that person. So your eye makes connections. Your eye makes connections between these lines. Even his arm coming out is making a connection. So it all kind of works into flow. They don't talk about flow in here, but it all creates a flow. There's even a shape. There's this kind of pentagon shape here that's being created because they're all kind of moving together a little bit. There's a movement to it. Everything is, even her feet are going in this direction, so it's bringing you here. There's a line down here. Look at that. You could see, if I zoomed in here, I even created some texture there, so it creates a line. So it accentuates that line. There's a line here. So all that kind of stuff, all that directional stuff is this kind of stuff here. Continuing line, common fate. We'll talk about what that is, similarity, all this kind of stuff, proximity. There's all good spatial stuff, and we'll talk about this more when we get into composition, when we're actually putting together compositions. But that's why I used a painting to actually talk about composition, because you'll use composition in fine art and graphic design all the time. You'll use it in landscape design. You'll use it in interior design. And I think we'll end with this. I think that's good for now. This is a good start. And this will be a little introduction to Chapter 2 of the Cengage Robin Landa Graphic Design Solutions chapter. I know it's a lot of information, both from the two books, and you're going to just start to put things together. We'll start to do more hands-on designs and work, very simple kind of things, so we could start incorporating these design elements, these design principles, start using them all together, and start using them in our work, and also start critiquing things too. Just like I'm looking at the beer can and paintings and stuff like that, we'll start critiquing things as well. Packaging is a great way to critique things because they need to stand out on store shelves. Your eye goes to them. Sometimes you purchase things just by what the packaging looks like. I actually ordered that beer because I thought it was really cool design. They have a very cool packaging, branding identity for that brand of beer. That helps sell. You can't just walk into a store and just taste something. So, sometimes having really cool packaging and branding and labeling means a lot. So that's all part of graphic design. That's what sells. If you could get people to buy your product, that's very important. You'll make a lot of money. And that's our PowerPoint presentation on Chapter 2. Hopefully that gives you a good introduction of design elements, design principles, and we'll start to put all those things together.